Okay, great. Well, again, welcome everybody to today's webinar on urban tree risk and disasters. This is going to be presented to you by Rachel Barker with the project. She's a project manager with Arborimetric Solutions, and Dudley Hartle. He's with the U.S. Forest Service out of Athens, Georgia. And today's topic is going to be assessment, planning, and recovery. Now, I do need to point out that we have a supplemental document for the day, and that is a PDF file of the speaker's notes, 6 slides per page. You can find that back on the webinar portal under today's webinar, and it's called treerisk.pdf. You can download that at any time. You can print it off and follow along if you choose to. So this webinar is made possible with a collaborative partnership with Bob Barton, Bill Hubbard, and myself, Eric Taylor. But it takes a partnership of many people to make this happen. And so we really appreciate everybody's effort to make the webinar a success. So without any further delay, I'll hand it over and to, I guess, Dudley. I didn't ask if you were going first or not, but whoever's going first, take it away.
That would be me. Welcome to the webinar, Urban Tree Risk and Disasters, Assessment, Planning, and Recovery. I'm Rachel Barker, and I'm a project manager with Arborimetric Solutions. I'm formerly with Central Alabama Regional Planning and Development Commission in Montgomery, Alabama. Presenting with me today is Dudley Hartle, USDA Forest Service in Athens, Georgia, Center Manager of Urban Forestry South. This project is a partnership among Central Alabama Regional Planning and Development Commission, the Alabama Emergency Management Agency, the Society of Municipal Arborists, and the Alabama Association of Regional Commissions, with the USDA Forest Service providing technical oversight on behalf of the National Urban and Community Forestry Advisory Council, or NUTFAC. This project was recommended for funding by the National Urban and Community Forestry Advisory Council. See if I can advance my slides. Yes. In this presentation, we will discuss, in our presentation outline, why urban tree risk management. Why urban tree risk management, and why do we need it? Next, collaboration opportunities and strategies for both the professional urban forester and the emergency manager. How can they help each other to reach common goals? We will then discuss the connection between urban forestry and risk and disaster planning. And next is an overview of the GIS tool, the Urban Tree Risk Index, known as the UTRI model, and how it's used in the Vegetation Risk Management Plan. The details of how to build the model are available on Urban Forestry South's website at www.urbanforestrysouth.org. We'll have all that at the end of the session where you can see that as well. But you would search for webinar UTRI on the Urban Forestry South website. We'll then show how debris management plans can utilize the model and the maps to designate debris staging areas for use after an event. Next, the Vegetation Risk Management Plan and the outline of items to be included, but I do want to note that another webinar will be conducted on the details of how to develop the plan and build the UTRI model as well. Also the body of the template of the Vegetation Risk Management Plan, but these dates will also be at the end of the presentation. But we'll finish up with next steps of how the Vegetation Risk Management Plan and the UTRI can be integrated into other vital plans and updated in conjunction with those. Why urban tree risk management? I'd like for you to ask yourself, if you're an urban forester or city manager, or even if you help communities manage and plan their natural resources, have you taken steps to reduce or perhaps even eliminate your community's urban tree vulnerability in the next big disaster? Why do we need to manage trees for risk? Do urban foresters and emergency managers work together in your community? The fact of the matter is urban forestry meets emergency management time and time again. Although each profession is not totally aware of the other and the role each plays, they use different languages in referring to the same thing. Urban foresters, trees, are referred to by emergency managers as potential debris if the tree is standing, or debris if the tree is on the ground. The urban forester's trees are vegetation to the emergency manager. And they're not managed the same by the emergency manager as they are by the urban forester. There's a need to build relationships and partnerships with the two professions. They meet time and time again in all seasons, at all hours, in all kinds of situations. And trees and vegetation, although different to one another, are their common link. Trees impede 911 and emergency response, and they often damage critical structures and impede access to critical infrastructure facilities, such as police stations and hospitals, for example. Trees and the debris accumulated from their destruction is the major cost to emergency management. So how can the two professions, urban forestry and emergency management, work together to reduce the amount of debris after an event, which in turn will decrease the emergency management cost and reduces the impact of the major storms on the urban forest? So what's the answer? The answer is for urban foresters and emergency managers to get connected. It's a great way to jumpstart a fledgling urban forestry program or enhance an existing program by building in urban tree risk management. An urban forester has a lot to offer an emergency manager. A well-managed urban forest can reduce claims and injuries, can limit damage to critical infrastructures, and reduce cleanup costs, while all in all improving the overall urban forestry management response. So by developing urban tree risk management plans, urban foresters can bring their profession to the emergency manager's table. So let's look at some collaborative strategies and opportunities to incorporate urban forestry into emergency management while meeting both of the industry standards, FEMA standards for mitigation and arboriculture standards. As we began to look at how an urban forester and an emergency manager might collaborate, we wanted to show exactly where the two might have opportunities to interact in relation to the involvement of an urban forester or a like-minded professional in the care of a community's urban forest. An urban forester is likely to be involved on the state level or regional level in a partnership and utilized more likely in the planning phases of how to manage and develop the plan, where at the community level, the urban forester is more likely to be utilized with the hands-on implementation and overseeing the plan. So it's more from a general role to a more detailed role. The Vegetative Management Plan and the GIS model, the UTRI, utilizes that same concept of the general overall look at a region, a look at the overall vegetation, versus the more detailed is utilized in the Community Tree Risk Management Plan. The involvement of the urban forester will be similar, from the general partnership planning involvement to the more hands-on and implementation, the more detailed the plan is, like the Tree Risk Management Plan. These are some of the plans that are often developed and are shown here on the same scale from a general down to a detailed level. There are plenty of opportunities for collaboration with urban foresters and emergency managers in all of these, with that vegetation risk management plan being the new link, the link that the two professions can work hand in hand developing. Here's some measured results from aggressive tree risk management program in Columbus, Georgia. These were taken during the time of 2001 to 2006 when I was employed as a city arborist there, but we show these to demonstrate the measured success of a tree risk management plan can have for a community. We were able to reduce claims as they relate to trees by over 72%, which was a big number, reduced work order complaints and requests for services by over 55%, and reduced 911 and overtime expenditures for tree cleanup by over 69%. So the emergency management cycle consists of mitigation and planning, recovery, and response. So we've tried to identify several areas where the urban forestry profession can collaborate with the emergency manager. So let's look at some of these on this list. Identifying critical infrastructure to include the vegetation at critical facilities. The Vegetation Risk Management Plan and the UTRI model gives you that ability to evaluate and mitigate trees at critical infrastructures as necessary. The GIS mapping, identifying the potential high debris and hazard areas. Where there's more trees, there's going to be more debris. Debris estimation, our model will help utilize street segments that can be used for random sampling. Even exercises, the two utilizing the UTRI data and the model for disaster exercises, you can prioritize response for public works personnel. Again, where there's more canopy, there's going to be more debris. So here's a few more pre-hazard mitigation planning. Mitigating by pruning and removing in scheduled inspections of identified area. The UTRI will help to identify these areas. Debris management plan, utilizing the UTRI GIS tool, and we'll talk about this a little later, to identify staging areas for debris as closest to the areas with the most potential for debris. Local ordinances. Analyze and development of ordinance such as tree planting requirements on major corridors and emergency routes. Being sure that appropriate species of trees are being replanted and planted in these areas. Under the response category, we've identified 5 areas to include. Identifying critical infrastructure, prioritizing response to high hazard areas and routes. Again, the UTRI and the Vegetation Risk Management Plan identifies these. Staging areas for debris, again locating those. And debris estimation under response, utilizing street segments that the UTRI will help you develop for random sampling. The Urban Forest, UFST is Urban Forestry Strike Teams. They are trained teams for debris estimation utilizing FEMA 325 guidelines. We'll address these teams and the MOUs in more detail during the future webinars. Both the strike teams and the MOUs with other states for professional urban forestry assistance are wonderful tools for the emergency manager to utilize during the response phase. Debris management protocol under recovery. Again, high hazard areas will most likely produce those highest amounts of debris, so you can plan accordingly. Another good method under recovery is the insect disease and invasive species separation. For those of you that are dealing with invasive species and insect problems, you can utilize the Vegetation Risk Management Plan along with the model to develop opportunities to include protocols for separation so that they don't get into your general stream of disposal of debris. And pruning and removal is determined by identified areas and based off of evaluation and inspection. So these are all outcomes of a vegetation risk management plan. So also under recovery, we have identified replanting and education. It's a great collaborative opportunity for BMPs for planting the right tree in the right spot. Also education on proper pruning and planting. FEMA works along these same guidelines. They have FEMA on their FEMA website, BMPs, and here's some examples of preemptive pruning. Tree trimming is a damage reduction measure. We've talked about urban foresters and other like-minded professionals, and you might be asking where to find these people. The Society of Municipal Arborists, one of our partners on this project, has a comprehensive list of who works with and manages community trees on their website at www.urban-forestry.com. There you will find a link to their BMP series, Green Communities or Smart Communities, and each BMP has an associated link sheet with links to resources available to you. So now we are going to ask one of our questions of all of you participating. So if you go to your yes/no selection, have you collaborated with another professional, urban forester, or emergency manager in regard to trees and disasters in your community or community you work with?
Take just a couple of seconds to give people a chance to respond, and I'll post those results. Please use your emoticon, which is underneath your name, to respond with either a check or an X. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. There we go.
Okay, so go ahead.
Thank you, Rachel. And I'm going to discuss briefly here in this section the basic background that Rachel used in developing the UTRI, which is the GIS model. And just to give a little background, urban tree risk management is a comprehensive approach, and the basic guide we're using is the publication that Jill Picorni edited in 2003 called Urban Tree Risk Management, a Community Guide to Program Design. And urban tree risk management is a logical and necessary starting point for disaster preparedness. The problem is that many communities are not able to implement risk management in that form because of the amount of time it takes and resources. So the UTRI is a way to kind of jumpstart that process at a little bit less detailed level and still provide information to the disaster management team within your county or in your region that would be useful for disaster preparedness. Communities have a couple choices when dealing with risk. They can choose risk avoidance, which typically means eliminating all possibility of risk. And in terms of trees, that means cutting all trees down so that they don't damage anything during any storm. Or they can propose some level of risk management where they reduce their level of risk. And the UTRI model is actually a way to identify areas of the highest concern related to disaster response and recovery for the communities to work on first. It's certainly not necessary to practice risk avoidance in order to be prepared for disasters. The risk management process that is outlined in Jill Picorni's guide follows 10 steps, and there's 4 of these steps that somewhat overlap the GIS model approach. They aren't identical, but they're the elements that have been used to try to replicate this process at a level that's not tree specific, but still allows us to get to the point where we have a tree risk zone map. And I'll come back to this slide in a little bit, but the tree risk management guide ends that process in the planning portion of that guide develops a tree risk zone map, and this is quite comparable to what the UTRI develops. In the GIS model developed under this grant application, the street segments, that's the area of a street between 2 cross sections, are basically identified as zones, and each of these is ranked for their level of risk or importance in consideration for tree management. In the UTRI model, we look specifically at critical facilities like hospitals, emergency management office facilities, police stations, fire stations, and the public access to those locations. Obviously the presence of people, high density population areas, and then in this model, then our tree element is the absence or presence of trees, and we look at that in terms of tree canopy. The tree risk plan, an urban tree risk management plan can support lots of different activities. A full-fledged program is certainly a basis for a robust urban forest management program. It can support other municipal staff, and then in any form, whether it's a full program or some abbreviated implementation of a tree risk plan, can help local emergency management, and that's the focus of Rachel's work here. So this is a question I want to pose just to kind of see where the audience kind of stands. How many of you, regardless of your profession, are involved with tree risk management program in your community? And that will be an interesting, I think, place for us to kind of start this discussion. Oh, they got it. I thought Eric was going to give you instructions, but everybody's counting up. So
I was going to, but I thought I saw everybody was doing it. So
yep, they got it.
Okay, give 5 more seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1.
So we've got not at all about 20%. Some discussion, that's good, and C, some work's been started. New concept, a few people. Well, that's good. So let's go from there then and kind of see what we can discuss here and kind of show you what this GIS model is, which is kind of what we're referring to as kind of a fast track to tree risk management for disaster preparedness. So Rachel has discussed kind of the why, what the need is in terms of risk management related to disaster preparedness, and kind of who the partners are in this collaboration. After I speak, she's going to talk about the Vegetative Risk Management Plan, that's the VRMP, and what I'm going to discuss first, though, is how this Urban Tree Risk Index, the UTRI model, is kind of put together in very general terms. As Rachel indicated, we will have additional webinars over the next couple months to discuss some of this in a lot more detail. So the whole emphasis here is to reduce the impact of storms on the urban forest, and to also reduce the impact of the urban forest on emergency management, and that's typically in terms of cost. And one of the things, if both of those happen, we typically will lessen personal injuries and property damage. So we're trying to locate the areas of most importance with the highest probability of a problem and make some detailed assessment and mitigate risk as we find it. So UTRI is the fast track to urban tree risk management. It is not detailed, but it does give us kind of a big picture at a county level. And of course, as you get into smaller levels, you can have additional detail, and at some point, the development of a more comprehensive urban tree risk management plan is probably as fast as looking at it in more of the big picture. But this is designed as a tool to work with emergency managers. risk management plans don't have to be based on a lot of detailed data, and this was pointed out in Joe Picorni's guide, that sometimes just a good general mapping of tree risk zones is sufficient for smaller communities, and at larger scales is probably maybe a practical approach. And so the UTRI is that more practical landscape scale approach to assessing vulnerability in various locations around your community. You know, the guiding principles are public safety, increased public safety, reducing disaster-related interruptions, and promoting tree health and sustainability. So what we do in any type of tree risk management plan is identify and assess the trees, and in this case we identify them in relationship to the facilities, transportation routes, and congregations of people that are most important. So we're looking for population centers, we're looking for tree canopy, we're looking for important routes in the county that get someone to and from a hospital, and we're looking for the emergency operations center or the emergency managers or emergency management facility in the county as the most important and primary facilities. Or at least those are some examples of what you need to look at. The process and outcomes then is you come up with more of a cursory big picture approach that leads you then into the street as the urban forest manager to verify the level of risk you've identified, and also then to identify opportunities for mitigation that will reduce or eliminate some of the risk that you might expect during your next disaster. Safety, public safety is the issue, and we're looking for anything we can do to make it easier following a disaster for the response teams to operate. That means basically keep the roads open and keep the electricity on. So in the GIS tool that has been developed, the general approach is we identify the canopy in relationship to those facilities. We do a field verification of the highest, those segments rated highest probability of risk. And then we identify any tree management that we can recommend to reduce that risk. And then we start to perform that mitigation to the extent budgets and resources allocate. And then the other thing is even in street segments you haven't verified in detail in the street, you can use the UTRI rating as a level of return visit for possible inspection. So it helps you set up prioritization and then scheduling. And this is the 4 layers. There's actually 5 layers we use, and for urban foresters, I've kind of in the right-hand side of this slide in the brackets, I put in some of the words we use when we talk about tree risk, but we're using the tree layer as just the surrogate for a potential failure. And obviously we don't know defects, health, or anything about the trees other than we've got trees and what percentage of trees we might have in that area. So we're using that as kind of the failure that we are trying to mitigate. The transportation layer, the road network, roads and the people that drive on them are part of a target zone. And the roads also are the access points to the critical facilities, which is another target zone and area of interest in disaster response, is keeping access to critical facilities open as much as possible. And then, of course, population, as population increases, your potential for targets, anything that can be harmed by a tree failure, whether it's a limb or an entire tree falling down, is increased. And of course, population becomes a target if roads are blocked and ambulances can't get to them during a critical emergency. So the process in this model is just basically the same as any GIS process, and you assemble some data, all the data you need for these 4 layers. You do a lot of vector to raster conversion, and you assign risk based on the category of the transportation corridor, the facility. Risk for population is usually based on population density, and tree canopy risk is based on the density of the canopy in that target zone. So here's an example of, in Elmore County, Alabama, where Rachel tested this, of one of the layers, and this is the called critical facility access. This is not every street or road in the county, but these are the state highways and other roads that are important links from population centers to facilities of need, whether that's a hospital or some other emergency facility. And I've blown up the area in this area here is just kind of the blown up area of this downtown Wetumpka, Alabama area. And this actually shows, I think it only shows about 2 different levels of risk assigned to these access routes for these facilities. But in this area is a tremendous amount. All of these little red X's are what we identified as critical facilities. And this, I believe, Wetumpka is the county seat. So we've got a lot of public buildings concentrated in this area. So that's what we try to do with each layer, is identify risk and assign it. And you can see in the bigger map here, we've got a route here that's it's a green color, which means it's less risk. This looks like a different color here. It's even less risk than this. And so you break them into levels of risk, 4 or 5 categories to sum them up. The GIS model, it's a step-by-step process, and in developing the model and then testing it, and in some of the work I did helping test it, what's come out of this is a step-by-step approach that identifies a particular step, kind of gives an overview of what you're trying to do, gives you some idea of what data sources you might look for, and then it talks about some of the processing tools you might use, and it steps you through the whole process. If there's data layers that you're going to create, it tells you what those are, and it just guides you through the entire step. Starting in November, we're going to show this model in more detail during some more webinars that help you get an idea of kind of how to pull the data together. Someone familiar with GIS, though, I think could pull this the table and probably step through this without too much trouble. The Elmore County study, I believe, by someone fairly astute at GIS, you can probably do a county in a day. So it's going to take about 8 hours to pull that data together. And it depends a little bit on what data sources you use. So what are the products out of this model? There's a worksheet that, of course, there's a visual map that shows you visually kind of where your high priority zones are. So in our case, we use the same colors used in Joe Pokorny's guide. So red is highest highest concern. Orange is the next level, yellow, and then green. And so we end up with 4 categories. So visually you can see where things are, and then you get a list that's sorted by priority, and it's that list then you use to determine how to develop an inspection schedule, just to go look at those areas to see if there is a need for more detailed assessment of the trees in terms of their risk, and then whether any mitigation can be used to reduce that risk. You can also use these zones, as Rachel has indicated, as sampling strata for debris estimation. Since we've identified areas with the highest tree canopy, you can now stratify by density of canopy throughout your county and make certain you've sampled more appropriately. And you can also use those risk zones to pre-locate or locate potential disaster sites pre-disaster. Mainly because you got at least a visual, if not a GIS analysis of densities, potential densities of debris throughout the county. This is the final risk zone tree risk index map for Elmore County. And so you see that most of the county is a green color, and that's a good sign. Because that means that there's areas out here where the population is quite lower and there are no important facilities, or where there is no tree canopy near streets or facilities, that you don't have to be concerned about, because you've got areas in other parts of the county like this, downtown Wetumpka, that now show you specific segments of streets, and that's what these colors now represent, the combined index of all the layers. And so we've identified a 2 or 3 block section here. We've identified a 1 or 2 mile section here leading up to the bridge, and a few other spots around here. So these are, and then in general, these whole areas around here, because of the emergency management's offices are there, there may be a hospital down there, those types of things. So this is the visual map you get, and gives you your first clue. And there I've just blown that picture. This is that downtown Wetumpka area, and we happen to notice that there's a red dot came up here. Well, this is right at the bridge entrance, and sure enough, you go out to the bridge, and there's a tree, you know, right at the entrance to the bridge. And that tree failure, is, if the tree is of risk from some defect, could be a problem during a disaster, or at least one that would have to be cleaned up fairly quickly, since this is a major connection between 2 sides of the city. So this would prompt the urban forest manager to at least schedule for that area, and maybe this area and this area, at least a walk-by to determine if there's any defect and whether any mitigation might be needed. And then along with that, the urban forest manager has this type of worksheet that comes out, and these are prioritized in decreasing order, or any way you want, but decreasing order of tree risk index. This scale, I think, was an earlier pass at how this model would work. Typically, we set this final scale on numbers of 1 through 5 or 1 through 4, but that's kind of irrelevant. It's a decreasing order, so you go out and look at the segments, the street segments. Here's Chapel Road, and it looks like the 600, it's got a street segments that runs from 600 to 900, 69 to 95. So it's the sub 100 block of Chapel Road is a 16. Of course, now that I look at it, it's only 9 feet long, so we aren't too concerned about it. But you can see immediately, okay, here's a high risk zone and it's pretty long. We need to go look at trees there and see what's going on. So now we're going to ask a question to kind of lead into Rachel's conclusion here on debris management and then the Vegetative Risk Management Plan.
Have you, so everybody's keying into it, have you worked on a debris management plan for your community or county? All right.
And we'll publish those results in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Okay, so most have not worked on a debris management plan for your community or county. So I want to, that does lead us into debris management staging areas and how you can utilize the UTRI to help you develop staging areas for debris management. One of the highlights of utilizing the UTRI and its components, such as a parcel file, helps you get to where we're leading up to with staging areas. It helps you to identify potential staging areas that they might vary in size. This slide shows an attribute table. We were not able to blow it up, but we will for future ones, that shows a parcel file. It's used to find property locations within the county that belong to local, county, state, even school boards. They were used to identify these in the next slide. All the properties in red on this slide in Elmore County are local, county, state, or school board owned. The debris staging sites are then linked to the most populated areas, as well as areas with the most canopy. So over 12 sites were identified as viable throughout the county as debris staging areas. And here they are, the most viable debris staging sites that can then be related to population, density, tree canopy, road access, or the UTRI index by street segment. This is an example within the city of Millbrook. The site is currently owned by the school board. This site here is currently owned by, let's see if I did my arrow. This site here is currently owned by the school board for a future school. It's
Rachel, let
open
me
pasture.
interrupt you right there.
Mm-hmm.
Rachel, make sure to click your mouse button down so we can see what you're pointing to.
Ah, sorry. Here, pointing here. Okay, this is the school board property. It's open pasture, primarily with access to a state highway. And so you can see how it worked in. Here it is, again, down in the populated area of Millbrook. So I want to take a minute to share the overall outline of a vegetation risk management plan. And again, there's going to be future webinars. This one's for December 12th. It'll be strictly for the development of a vegetation risk management plan, but we want to address the components here. First, in a VRMP is the overview of the county, and this wording can often be gleaned from the county's hazard mitigation plan. Items can be population, growth over 10 years, future growth. Potential prior events, thunderstorm and hurricane events, for example, can be included, and often you'll find the need for the vegetation risk management plan cited in the county's hazard mitigation plan. Next is the UTRI and the outcomes of that tool. That would include the summary of the layers, the picture, as well as the summary that describes the areas that are in need of assessment, and the mitigation that might be necessary, if any, identified from that assessment, and that would be in table form. The outcomes are listed in the next section. The areas are sorted in a table form and they're referenced, as Dudley described with the Urban Tree Risk Management Guide for evaluation timing. Debris staging areas can be identified here, and additional collaboration strategies identified here as well for recovery, for example, planting the right tree in the right place. And then next steps, identified as the last topic. And this often includes the timing of the update of the Vegetation Risk Management Plan. So I want to highlight three important areas of the VRMP before we conclude, and those are the areas of assessment and mitigation by table, the future evaluation and assessment schedule for the areas identified by the UTRI, and next steps. So here again is the worksheet from the UTRI. The Vegetation Risk Management Plan will have these areas designated in table form, and the table is used for the field verification and to show the necessary mitigation, if any is required. So that might be prune, it might be remove of a tree, or it might be no action at all. And that's included in the Vegetation Risk Management Plan. The next section in outcomes I want to highlight is that future evaluation and assessment schedule. And the schedule goes hand in hand, as we've said before, with the Guide for Urban Tree Risk Assessment, Jill Pokorny's guide. And they're just to show that trees are living and growing organisms. The Vegetation Risk Management Plan, it gives the emergency manager and the urban forester a schedule to revisit those areas that are identified for evaluation and assessment. So the areas identified in the UTRI model that are very high, they would be inspected yearly, with any developments or requirements for mitigation noted and then acted upon. Areas identified as high are every 1 to 2 years, moderate 3 to 5, low 5 to 7. But you'll note that all of them, at a minimum, get a drive-by windshield survey after a severe storm event. So you'll most likely find trees in need of removal or pruning during the scheduled inspections. So you can see that the VRMP is a living and dynamic plan that can change as is needed. You've identified your most prone areas as it relates to emergency management and trees. It's a beginning to a more detailed community-based tree risk management plan. And the last area to highlight are the next steps, and in particular the timing and updating of the Vegetation Risk Management Plan. It really fits nicely into the Hazard Mitigation Plan update that's required every 5 years. As populations change, critical infrastructure, and the tree canopy changes, the VRMP gives a basis to manage that vegetation as it relates to emergency management. Collaboration ideas will continue to change. Needs identified for urban foresters and emergency managers to work together to help emergency managers meet that need, the need of safety and reduced cost of cleanup, while at the same time improving the overall health of the community's urban forest and building an urban forestry program's worth. The two, the Hazard Mitigation Plan and that VRMP, they're a nice fit that work hand in hand. We want to thank you for participating in this webinar. Here's some future dates for presentations on this project and associated material over the next several months, but we want to make a special note of a 3-hour workshop that's planned to be conducted in Sacramento, California at the 48th Annual SMA Conference and Trade Show. That workshop will cover detailed steps and examples for using the UTRI model and how to develop a vegetation risk management plan. So you can register at the Society Municipal Arborist website for that. So we'd like for you to join us at any of these events. Also, the PowerPoint will be posted on this site, I believe, as well as the urbanforestrysouth.org site. So you feel free to contact either one of us at our information provided here. And we thank you for your participation.
Hey, everybody, let's use our emoticons to give our presenters a big round of applause. And now is a good time to ask questions. We have a few minutes. So we'll take any questions that you might have, and if you'll type those into the chat box. While you're thinking about those questions, do you have any follow-up comments or anything, Dudley?
Well, Rachel, I was just going to, I was kind of thinking back to when you started this project several years ago now. The Vegetative Risk Management Plan, I believe, was being considered as a mandatory element in local emergency response plans. Was that correct, or am I thinking of something else?
Debris management plans.
Oh, the debris management plan. Okay, okay.
Okay, we have some questions coming in. Nick asks, what are some considerations for picking staging areas besides access to roads?
Some other areas for considerations will be most certainly ownership of property. I have seen areas for staging facilities in communities could even be a mall parking lot, but yet those areas need to have pre-established memorandum of agreements, prior to an event, if that seems to be a central area. So ownership's a big one, road access, and then is it already cleared or not? Obviously, even if it's owned by the state or city or county and is an area that has good access, if it's a wooded area, it's not going to be a good site for you.
Okay, good. And Chris asks, where could I find an example of VRMPs from other communities and counties?
You will be able to find one on site at on the www.urbanforestrysouth.org. That should be within the next month.
Okay. And we have another question. What is the date of your data? And does it take into account the tornadoes that occurred 2 years ago?
Most of the demographic and facility data was fairly current and came from U.S. Census, so as accurate and current as that is. That's the transportation networks. Critical facilities were actually identified at the region or local level, so we'll assume those are fairly up to date. The tree canopy is the big issue, and we use the NLCD, which is the National Land Cover Database, and that data is particularly old. So no, it doesn't include that. So many times, the older your tree canopy data is, many times you're going to go out there and the tree's already gone, and many times you won't identify segments with significant tree canopy that might be there. So those are critical things to think about. You can use tree canopy from any source, and the more current your tree canopy is, obviously the better.
Okay. Before we get to the question from Pete, let me push out the link to the survey. What I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a web browser in your window, and that new browser window may pop up in front of your current Collaborate window, so don't be too alarmed with that. And that will take you then to the survey. You're going to need to complete the survey first, and then pass a short quiz, and then you'll have your opportunity then to download and print your certificate of completion. So give me a second here, and you'll see that a browser window should pop up. If for some reason it does not, don't panic. It sometimes gets a little bit slow when we have a number of participants online at the same time. So what I'm going to do is then send you I'm going to put my email address in the link. I can't type and talk at the same time, obviously. But my email address is there, eltaylor@paumu.edu. I'm also going to push out I'm going to put the link in the box here. You can copy that and paste that in some Word document and try to visit that survey site at any time after this webinar. It doesn't run out, and so you can feel free to, if you're getting bogged down now, then try in 10 or 15 minutes and you should have no problem. So while that's cooking, Pete asks, have you included utility corridors as a data layer in the UTRI?
It can be used. You want to answer that, Dudley?
No, that's okay. I was going to say the same thing. We did not. Rachel didn't look at that initially, and I think that's after I ran through the first pass through Elmore County. That was kind of a question that came up. Some of the data used in her preliminary study was from the Homeland Security's CD repository of data, and they have pretty good utility data, but it was not included. But certainly if there are critical utility corridors, I guess the thinking on most electrical corridors is that they're doing their own risk management on the corridors to the NERC or the FERC standards, whichever they are, or both. And the likelihood of a tree in that corridor, finding something in that corridor, is probably pretty low, and the hope is that the utility risk management program is handling that. The thing to think about would be utility locations like substations that they might have to get access to.
Now we did use that in Elmore County.
You could easily add those. I mean, there's. Oh, you did put the utility substations in. Okay, well that's good. That's good. But the actual corridors we're thinking are being covered by utility risk management. If you thought different, you could include them. I don't think in most cases your data at this level of resolution would probably be good enough that you would really do a lot of good. Plus, keep in mind your collaboration here. Well, your collaboration could include the utility forester for that utility, but your collaboration is the county or municipal level urban forester and the emergency management. The county urban forester probably doesn't have any control over utility corridors.
No, but
so you have to make certain your partnerships were set up correctly in the beginning.
They could be a collaborator, most certainly.
Yeah, that would be one. I don't know if that was in your original list, Rachel, but that would be a good collaborator to add, at least to be apprised of how current their risk management program is on their utility corridors. Long answer for a short question.
Okay, as we're winding down, we'll give people maybe a couple more minutes to think about and formulate a question in the chat box. Just remind everybody that I pushed out the webinar. I pushed out the survey link through a web browser. If you did not see a new web browser pop up on your computer, then feel free to click the link that I provided in the chat window just underneath my email address. If that does not open up a web browser window, then copy and paste that into a browser window that you open up on your own. Of course, all this is dependent upon whether or not you actually use the webinar portal, forestrywebinars.net, to log into the webinar at the beginning. If you continue to have problems, please send me an email at eltaylor@tamu.edu. All right. Hey, you know what? We're ending on time. That's pretty good. It's like the first time ever for me. And I appreciate everybody's efforts. And guys, you did an excellent job presenting the materials. So, any more questions coming in? Rachel and Dudley, any more comments?
I'm done here. Rachel, you want to end this?
Yeah, I will end it. I would like to, again, invite people to our future presentations and the workshop in Sacramento. And do feel free to contact either one of us for any questions offline.
And we'll have, through the normal distribution channels for advertising webinars, we'll have that information out about a month before those webinars in November and December are ready to take place. Thank you, Eric.
Then. Thank you. That was great. Appreciate all your efforts.
Thank you.
Well, the webinar is over, so I'm going to end the webinar in 1 minute, whether you're still on or not.